Your source for everything paranormal. ParaX. Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Channeling History. You should probably know it by now, but we're the only show where we speak to the souls that made things happen, and we're brought to you every Sunday on the ParaX Radio Network. I'm Barry Strohm, your host, and I will be doing the channeling tonight.
And I'm Connie Strohm, your co-host. I will be asking the questions of our spirit guests tonight. Last week, we channeled the spirit of Alexander the Great, the 4th century BC Greek individual that conquered all the known countries of the world before dying at the age of 32. If you missed it, the channeling is available on our YouTube channel. During the week, we did a special channeling when we were honored with the spirit of the Prophet Muhammad. The complete session is also available on our YouTube channel. It's a wonderful message, and it will give you a better appreciation for the Islam religion. Tonight, we will be speaking with the spirit of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States. He served during one of the most difficult times of our country, the Civil War.
Yes, it was an incredible time. We used to have a store very near Gettysburg, so I was kind of a Civil War buff myself, and many times went to the spot where he gave his famous speech. So anyway, we always try to give a little bit of a disclaimer before we start the show. There's always somebody who's going to disagree with us. So anyway, the opinions or statements voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits and do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of the ParaX network, or our sponsors. All of our shows are available on our YouTube channel. It's in my name, Barry Strohm, Strohm, or if you'd like to download them, go to Podomatic.com and just simply search Channeling History. We're also currently doing a podcast named A Weekly Message from Jesus. Each week we bring a message of faith and inspiration to help guide us through the current troubled times, and we post those messages from our Lord on Wednesdays.
Okay, I would like to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to our show and even join us in our chat room. Your questions, as always, are appreciated. And please tell your friends about us so we can continue to grow our audience, because we might not be quite on track, but we think we have some really great guests that put out some really great information.
Okay, before we channel, you know that we always say a prayer of protection. This prayer was actually given to us by the spirit guides when we first began to communicate. Connie will now say the prayer, and we will begin to channel with Abraham Lincoln.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God.
Well, I've been really looking forward to this tonight, and I know that it's going to be a wonderful channeling. So, Connie, let's get with it and see what Mr. President has to say for us.
Okay, I will be referring to him as Abe because he told me that we're friends and I can call him Abe, so I'm not being disrespectful. Abe, would you like to begin with a message?
Yes, I would like to thank you for inviting me back once again. In my day, I used to be able to speak to large audiences. I wish that I would have had access to some of the equipment that you use, but we never, in our wildest dreams, imagined what would be taking place today. I was sent back in a very troubled time. America was being split in half. The southern states were trying to exert their rights they wanted to maintain slavery, and the northern states wanted to maintain the Union, and many wanted to abolish slavery. The arguments had been going on for many, many years. While I had held earlier political office, I participated in many of the arguments. The Civil War was a horrendous event. I cannot tell you what it was like to go out to those battlefields where thousands of young boys on both sides met their deaths. In the end, we prevailed, and we did manage to end slavery in the United States. There is probably much more that I could have done, but my life ended very rapidly, and things did not go in the direction that I had hoped. So anyway, I know you have a bunch of good questions for me, so let's get started, and I hope that I can answer them for you.
Okay, you were born in 1809 in Kentucky. What was life like in America when you were growing up?
In 1809, Kentucky was still a very primitive area. There were very unsure lines of property ownership, and there were still much taking place. It was entirely a rural area. There was no industry of any kind. There were no schools. And you had to be very self-sufficient. America had been growing on the back of slavery in the South. There were many that wanted to extend slavery through the new states that were coming into the Union, and there were many that were just as adamant that slavery would not be allowed in those areas. As I said, there were very few small schools available. Teachers would go from rural schoolhouse to rural schoolhouse. They were one rooms, and all the students were in there together. There were not many books available. It was a very difficult time, especially when you were in the West. We moved to Indiana, and I eventually wound up in Illinois. But I basically grew up with a farm lifestyle. If you did not raise the crops in those days, you would go hungry. So it was a very difficult time. We had no stores to go to stock up like you do today, and self-sufficiency was one of the main things you needed for success.
Okay, what was the ultimate reason that you left Kentucky for?
My father was having land ownership disputes. He was being sued, and he figured that it would be better if they left Kentucky and started anew up in Indiana. We did homestead in Indiana, and that is where I spent quite a bit of the time of my youth.
Okay, did you have any formal education?
No. We would occasionally have a circuit teacher stop by and speak to us, but it was very difficult. I tried to borrow books, and I tried to read as much as I could. I wanted to learn, but there were very few opportunities to gain information in those early days.
Yeah. Okay, your mother died when you were only 9 years old. What effect did that have on your family?
Well, in those days, when your mother died, the oldest sister of the family would take over. My sister was only 10 years old, and she did her best, but it was a very difficult time. My father did his best as well to take care of us, but we were on a farm, and without having my mother to do the meals, it was a very, very difficult time. My father did remarry a couple years later, and I had a wonderful relationship with my stepmother. She was a great person, and I even referred to her as Mom.
What was your opinion of farm life at that time?
I found farm life very boring. It was basically work from dawn till dark. You had no use of power equipment. You would rely on a horse pulling the plow to plow your field. You would do a lot of hand raking, and it was back-breaking work. If the weather did not adapt to what you wanted, if you had drought, then you could lose your entire crop. It was a very difficult lifestyle, and the more I participated in it, I realized that it was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Was that the reason you left home? Or was something else also involved?
No, my father was talking about moving again to Illinois, and I felt that it was time for me to strike out on my own. I wanted to try to do some other things, and I wanted to try to get myself in a position that I could better educate myself. I understood that when you lived on a farm, you would have very little influence on others, and I was starting to take a modest interest in the politics that was going on around us. So I felt that the only way that I could make it was if I left the farm and tried to self-educate myself.
How were you introduced to slavery?
In those days, Indiana was a slave-free state. When I left home, I did several different types of work. One of them was working on a barge that delivered goods down to the south. When I arrived down in the southern areas, I saw that the slaves were doing most of the heavy work. Many of them were being mistreated, and I realized that slavery was a terrible thing.
So what was your early opinion concerning slavery, other than the fact that it was terrible?
I knew that it was a very difficult situation. The South relied upon slavery. Without slaves, there was no way that they could work the large plantations, and there was no way that they could pick the cotton or the other products that they needed. Other labor was just simply not available in those days. While I was opposed to individuals owning another one, I really didn't make my feelings that apparent. There was so much animosity between the abolitionists and the slave owners that I did not really want to get involved.
Why did you decide to become a lawyer?
I realized that a lawyer's education and work would allow me to get involved with politics. I was starting to see all the problems that was going on around us. You could tell that there were many problems that were not being decided in Washington. There were many stalemates. And I felt that by becoming a lawyer, I would learn the skills that I needed to debate, and that I would be educated enough to hold my own with the other individuals that were running for public office.
Okay, did you attend any law school, or did you study under another attorney?
I never attended any law school, and while I did work for some other attorneys, they did not do much for me to further my education. I studied as much as I could. I borrowed law books, and I read everything that I could get my hands on that pertained to an occupation as a lawyer. I did manage to study enough to pass the Illinois bar exam. In those days, things were much different. If you could answer the questions, then you would be accepted as a lawyer. It was not necessary that you would go to one of the better known schools. And in those days, there were no law schools readily available to us. If you lived in states like Indiana or Illinois, they were pretty much on the frontier. And if you wanted to learn, you pretty much had to do it on your own.
Okay, what were your early beliefs concerning God?
I always believed in God. There was never any doubt in my mind that God truly existed. But there were other things in the Bible that I had trouble understanding. There were things like Noah and the ark and Adam and Eve, and I just could not put my arms around understanding the concepts that were presented in some of the Gospels. I did have a classic education from the Bible. I studied very diligently from the Bible, and it became a great crutch for me that I could pray to God and hope that the answers that I was getting would be proper for the leadership that I wanted to exert.
Okay, you were married in 1842. Tell us about your early married life with Mary Todd.
Mary Todd was a wonderful person. She came from a more wealthy family, and we built a home in Illinois, and I practiced law from that home. In those days, attorneys would ride a circuit, and they would be away from home for quite a long duration of time. Mary handled the finances during those days. She handled the raising of the children, and she was a wonderful wife for me.
Okay, she came from a family of slaveholders. How did that affect your opinion on slavery?
Mary's family did truly own slaves, but when she married me, we would no longer have any slaves in our household. She came from a family that treated their slaves very well. They did enforce the rules, but in many instances their slaves were treated like family. Even though they were bound to the family, they had a true relationship with Mary's family. My feelings towards slavery was reinforced, and before we married, I discussed it with Mary, and she understood that we would not ever own slaves.
Okay, what was it that made you decide to enter politics?
There was much going on in those days. The idea of slavery was permeating almost all of the acts that were taking place around us. Our country was young and was attempting to expand. The southern leaders wanted those states to be able to have slaves, and the northern leaders did not want that. I felt that our state was not being properly represented, and I began to seek political office. I used my education as a lawyer to be able to debate and to be able to change people's minds. I felt that I was being called to public service, and that was what I attempted to pursue.
In 1847, you were elected to the House of Representatives. Why did you pledge to serve only one term?
I felt that if you served multiple terms in Congress, that you would become beholden to those that were contributing money to elections. I wanted the people to understand that I would go and that I would do my best for them for the 2-year term. I would quit after that 2-year term because I did not want to build the monetary relationships that many of the other members of Congress had built. I wanted to be free to do what I felt was best for the people.
Too bad they don't still do that today. What do you think of the current members of our Congress?
I think that many of the current members of our Congress have gone astray. There are individuals that have served for 30, 35 years in Congress. During that time, they have come under the influence of individuals that contribute heavily to their campaigns, and there's no way that they can maintain a neutrality and be reelected to their offices. Yeah. Many think that they are going to help the people when they go to Congress, but they find out very rapidly that the financial requirements of reelection and the pressures that are brought from groups that have untold monetary resources bring pressures that many of the members of your Congress have succumbed to. There are very few of them that have the nerve to truly represent what their people want.
Okay. You were elected to offices in Illinois and in Washington. At the age of 40, you became frustrated with politics. This is probably a silly question, but why?
I had run for an office that I thought I could win, and I was defeated. I was frustrated by it. I thought that my life and Mary's future would be better served if I just continued with acting as an attorney. But, as you know, it did not last that long.
That's true. In 1854, you got back into politics. What inspired that?
I could see that things were rapidly changing. The country was becoming more and more split. The parties, I felt, were not truly representing what the individuals of the states wanted. I felt that central government was growing too rapidly, and I thought that I would like to get back into politics and try to help any way I can or could to solve many of the problems that Washington was facing at the time.
Okay. You were originally a member of the Whig Party that became split and lost its voters. The result was the founding of the Republican Party. What did the Republican Party stand for in those days?
The new Republican Party was more of a populist party. They were trying to bring back the concept that politicians would represent the people from the states in which they lived. They were basically an anti-slavery party. In those days, many of the Democrats were from the South, and they represented the concept that slavery was vital to the economy of the South, and therefore should remain as a primary source of labor for them.
In the end, why did you become a Republican? What inspired you?
There really wasn't much choice. the Whig Party was being destroyed from within, and the only real choice was that to become a Republican. There was no way that I could join a party that supported slavery. So I decided that the Republican Party was the best choice for me.
Okay, in 1857, the Supreme Court passed the Dred Scott decision. What was the impact of the Dred Scott decision?
The Dred Scott decision was probably the worst decision ever made by the Supreme Court. It basically stated that blacks were never going to become citizens of the United States, and it green-lighted the concept that slavery would remain part of the law of the land. I think that the judges thought that their decision would help bring peace between the two parties, but it had the exact opposite effect. The Northerners fully resented the decision, and the country became even more split after Dred Scott.
Yeah. Okay. You were elected president in 1860 with less than 40% of the popular vote. Tell us about that election, please.
It was a very interesting election. I was told not to go out and get on the stump and to campaign actively. The members of the party campaigned for me. There were youth groups that were supporting me, and there were 4 people running for the presidency. I carried the states that were very important with electoral votes. Pennsylvania was critical, as was New York State and Ohio, much like it is today. I won, I carried the states with the greatest electoral votes, even though I only had less than 40% of the popular vote. I had a landslide of electoral votes and was elected as president.
Okay. Why was the South so upset when you were elected president?
The politicians of the South knew that I was opposed to slavery. They also knew that the Republican Party had many people in it that were very opposed to slavery. When I was elected, many of the politicians of the South made up their mind that it was time for them to exert their state rights and secede from the Union. It was a very upsetting time for me because I was never given a chance to mediate between the North and the South.
Yeah. Why did you decide to not abandon Fort Sumter?
I felt that if we abandoned Fort Sumter, and many people advised me to do that it would be taken as a sign of weakness. I felt that if we abandoned Sumter, then the states that were succeeding would continue to push, and that we would be forced to abandon other areas. I decided that we would try to strengthen Sumter, and I thought by doing that, it would deter the Confederates from attacking it. I was obviously very wrong.
Okay, so when Sumter was fired upon, that was your primary goal.
Yes, my primary goal was to try not to have it fired upon.
Okay. At the beginning of the Civil War, what do you consider your greatest mistakes?
In the beginning, war was breaking out and I was just becoming president. I did not truly understand a lot of the ins and outs of the politics involved when you are president of the United States. I underestimated the fighting ability of the southern states. I did not believe that they could put together such a strong army in such a short period of time. I felt that we would be able to reconcile. I tried to have an immediate victory, but that did not happen. And we became so deeply involved in the Civil War that there was no chance of mediation. Okay, let's take a little break. In honor of Mr. Lincoln being with us, we're going to do something a little different during the break. So we are going to play the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Don't go away. Channeling History will return right after these brief messages.
Eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the graves of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence in the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Welcome back to Channeling History. Now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Welcome back. Thousands and thousands of the Union soldiers listened to that song and marched to their deaths. There were over 1 million casualties on both sides of the Civil War. So I just thought it might be appropriate to play the main song, the main marching song of the Union Army at that time. So anyway, Connie.
Hey, Abe, why did you suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus?
At the beginning of the war, we had no idea who was on our side and who wasn't. Maryland was almost evenly split and almost seceded from the Union. When I was trying to come in for my inauguration, there was a plan to assassinate me, and I had to actually disguise myself to get into Washington, D.C. I understood that what I was doing with habeas corpus was probably not constitutional, but I felt that we needed to get questionable individuals off the street so that we could define who were our friends and who were not.
Okay. Why did you order the immediate advance into Virginia that ended up resulting in the defeat at Bull Run?
I felt that if we had an immediate victory over the Confederates, that we could negotiate a peace. I totally underestimated the fighting ability of the Confederates at Bull Run. My generals also were very poor in their decision making and their decisions helped lead to a drastic defeat. After Bull Run, the Confederates knew that they could defeat us, and they became an incredible fighting unit. It actually took us several years to catch up to the Confederates in our fighting abilities.
What was your opinion of General McClellan?
In the beginning, I thought that McClellan was our best bet. I put him in charge of the armies, and all he wanted to do was train and prepare and build armies in size, and really was very poor at planning and in actually carrying out battles. I did not realize at the time that he also had political expectations and had hoped that he would run for president against me. So I think there were many things going through McClellan's mind, and I made the mistake of trusting him.
Okay, sadly, you had 2 of your 4 children die during your lifetime. How did that affect you and Mary?
It was devastating, especially for Mary. Mary was a very, very loving person, and she felt so close to the children. When they died, it really affected her. It put her into a very deep depression, and I think in modern terms, especially when Willie died, you would say that she had a nervous breakdown. Mary was highly affected by it. I was totally destroyed as well, but I had to face up to my responsibilities. It was an incredibly difficult time for me.
Yeah. So did you have depression most of your life?
There were many times that I suffered from depression. There were times that I was defeated running for political office. There was times that I felt that my career was not going anywhere, and I was very depressed. I was depressed when I was sent to Washington, and I realized how little impact I would have as a member of Congress. And when Willie died while I was president, it was devastating.
So did that severely affect your ability to govern?
It did affect some of my decision making. The period right after his death, I tried my hardest to have my grief in one compartment and my responsibilities as president in another. But it was a terrible, terrible time for me, and I was indeed in a deep depression.
Yeah. What was your opinion of General Grant?
I went through a lot of commanding officers in the Union Army, and I was met with disappointment. My advisors told me that General Grant was an alcoholic, had no respect for the death of his men, and would not be an effective general. But as the war progressed, General Grant was the only individual that was having victory after victory. And I came to the conclusion that I would entrust him with control of the Army. It was the best decision that I ever made, because Grant turned out to be a brilliant leader.
Okay, in September of 1862, you issued an Emancipation Proclamation in which you freed the slaves in states currently engaged in the rebellion. It did not free the slaves in border states that supported the Union. What did you accomplish with the Emancipation Proclamation?
I realized that the Emancipation would not actively free many slaves, because it only applied to the southern states and we were at war with them. But at that time, the French and the British were contemplating entering the war because our blockades were affecting their supply of cotton. I realized that Britain and France were very anti-slavery. And by me freeing the slaves, essentially, I put Britain and France in a position that they would not be able to enter the war.
Okay, what constitutional basis did you have for the proclamation?
I don't think I had any. But I knew that there would be a time that we would have to have an amendment to the Constitution. But I also felt that the proclamation, as I just discussed, would serve the purpose of preserving neutrality on the side of our European friends.
Okay, when you gave the speech at Gettysburg, did you have any idea it would become your most famous speech?
Absolutely not. I actually put the speech together while I was riding the train to Gettysburg. It was a very short speech. The other speakers spoke for hours, and I just spoke for a couple minutes. I said what was in my heart and what I believed, and you are still memorizing that speech today.
Yes.
I am very amazed by that.
Yes, every year it's celebrated in Gettysburg. It's a big day. Okay, the 13th Amendment passed in December of 1865 and it eliminated slavery in the entire United States. Tell us about the battle for the 13th Amendment.
We tried for months to get the amendment passed. The Democrats in Congress were vehement that we should not do this. They were still thinking that they could reconcile with the South at some time. I was vehement in my desire to have the freeing of the slaves, an amendment to the Constitution, so that it would become absolute law of the land. It took much arm twisting and trading, but we managed to get the amendment passed. And it was one of the greatest achievements that I could have ever hoped for. I had finally succeeded in ending slavery in the United States.
Okay, we have a good question from the chat room. It says, what are your thoughts on the South removing Confederate statues today? Thank you for that question, sir.
I am very disgusted by that. The Southerners truly believed in their cause. They felt that God was on their side just as we felt that God was on our side. Even though we defeated them, they were still our brothers. They were members of our same country. And the monuments to the brave Confederates were just as important as the monuments to the Union brave. Keep in mind that the Civil War began over an issue of states' rights and of their abilities to withdraw from the Union. They thought they had the right to withdraw, and we thought that they did not. It was not an issue of slavery in the beginning. The vast majority of soldiers that fought never owned a slave. They felt that they were protecting their country just the same as we felt that we were protecting our country. The monuments represent history that has lessons to be learned. If you destroy the lessons of history, then you will make the same mistakes in the future.
Exactly. Do you have psychic abilities, Abe?
I did, yes. I would actually have visions, and I would pray deeply for help in many of the critical decisions that I had to make. I would get answers in my dreams, and I would have messages from my guides as they tried to direct me. I did not truly understand what was taking place, but today you would say that I did truly have psychic ability.
Okay. Did you foresee your death?
I had a dream that something was going to happen to me. I felt that there was danger, but I never felt that it was going to be so immediate after the war. I thought that when we had the armistice, that things would settle down, but apparently there was still some very great hatred out there. And as I was to find out, there were people that wanted to assume the power of the presidency.
Yeah. Who was responsible for the plan for your assassination?
The main planners were my Secretary of War and my Vice President. There were others in the cabinet that also realized what was taking place. Johnson wanted to be president, and they put together the plan for my assassination.
Okay, were you surprised when you got to the other side and realized that Johnson was responsible?
I was utterly shocked. I had absolutely no idea that they would go to the extent of having me killed so that they could assume the presidency.
Okay, was John Wilkes Booth really killed in Virginia?
No. Stanton, as Secretary of War, controlled the military and put together a very intricate plan so that the people would think that Booth had been truly killed. They arranged for a rapid trial for those that were closely involved, and it was the old dead men tell no tales for them. The individuals that were put in prison were told that they would be pardoned by Johnson, and at the end of his term he did so. Booth actually lived to a ripe old age, and no one ever realized for sure that he was never killed. But I am here to tell you that Booth did certainly not die in Virginia.
Okay, today our country is once again divided very deeply. What is your advice for our politicians today?
I would advise our current politicians to take a step back and understand that the hatred and deep division can only lead to problems for the future of the evolution of the country. The Constitution was put together to provide that the two parties, or whoever was having representatives, would have to negotiate and come to satisfactory agreements. They established a Congress and a Senate, and they put different rules for each of those houses. Today, your politicians are trying to bypass the checks and balances that were incorporated by the Founding Fathers. What they're trying to do is to put their party in a position that they have ultimate control. Today's politicians have to step back and diversify themselves from the great funding that is being provided to them. The amount of money that is being spent in your current elections is staggering. And no common politician would have the ability to raise that type of money without having very wealthy people donate to them. I would suggest that you set up a system where the government gives you a fixed amount of money with which to campaign, and you are limited to that amount of money. That would bring out the truth. Individuals would not have the money to spread all of the political lies and stories that they tell about themselves. I can guarantee you that if the opinions of your politicians do not change, things will be very, very difficult for your country.
You're right about that. Abe, we have another good question from our chat room. How would Reconstruction of the South been different had you lived?
I would have avoided the carpetbaggers that rushed to the South. I felt that the government should provide funding for Reconstruction and for rebuilding the economy of the South. I did not feel that the South should be penalized for the war. Once we signed the armistice, I considered them as returned brothers. There were too many that did not agree with me. And sadly, Reconstruction took a terrible turn, and hard feelings were made that would last for generations.
Okay, do you see General Robert E. Lee now that you're on the other side?
Absolutely. Robert is a wonderful soul, and we have actually become good friends. Keep in mind that he was a commander in the Union Army before deciding to remain loyal to the state of Virginia and fight for the Confederacy. Robert is a wonderful, wonderful person. He is a true believer in God and a very good man.
Okay. Have you reincarnated since your lifetime as Abraham?
No, I have not. I have decided to stay over here and try to influence your politicians in a positive way. Obviously, I have not been very successful.
That's a tough job. Are you a member of the soul family of Jesus?
Yes. God sent me back at that time to try to save the country that he had formed with the founding fathers. He realized that if the South split from the North, and there were two countries, that what he had conceived of when he influenced the founding fathers would never again exist.
Yeah. Do you have any plans to reincarnate?
I do not have any immediate plans to reincarnate, but if God asks me to return, then I will most certainly do it. So I have nothing against coming back. You're facing difficult times, and perhaps I can once again give some leadership and try to help those that need help.
Okay. Do you have a final message for our listeners?
Yes. I would like to thank you for allowing me to return and speak to you. I was president during a very, very troubled time in the history of America. You are once again facing very difficult times. What is required is that all of the great leaders of the world have to decide that everyone must coexist and that everyone must get along. They have to be able to overcome the incredible hatreds that have permeated many of the countries in the world today. You now have access to weapons of mass destruction that, if some maniac decides to use them, will set off a chain reaction that can absolutely destroy all of the human lives that are walking the earth today. It is a very simple thing. Follow the teachings of God. He wants you to love one another. He wants you to forgive. And he wants you to understand that it is only by following his teachings that evolution can truly advance and that your country can continue to be the shining light of the world. I was honored to be able to serve through the time of the Civil War. I think that my leadership was very important. There were those that wanted to do many different things during the war. There were those that wanted to settle and to assure that slavery would have lasted forever. My greatest achievement was to end slavery. So once again, I thank you for allowing me to come through. I hope that I have not bored you, and I hope that you will follow some of the advice that I have given. You can rest assured that by following the teachings of God, all would be well for you. So I'm going to say good night. Thank you for allowing me to speak once again, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Abe. God bless you. It's been an honor having you here.
Yes, you are an incredible leader, and I wish that some of the people in our government would pay attention to some of your words. Anyway, next week we're going to be attending the wedding of our granddaughter. So we're going to be playing a show from the archives, and it's going to be the interview with Archangel Metatron. Many of you enjoyed that interview, and I'm sure that it'll be good hearing it a second time. Connie and I will be back in 2 weeks, and at that time, we are going to interview Mother Teresa. She was an incredible individual, did much charity for the world, and is a wonderful example of what a soul should be. You can submit questions and suggestions for future guests through our emails, channelinghistoryonparax@gmail.com. My 7th book, Spirit Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold, and you can download it on Kindle. Signed copies are only available on my website. All of our shows are available on my YouTube channel. It's in my name, Barry Strohm. If you want to download them, go to Podomatic, search for Channeling History. We started a podcast, A Weekly Message from Jesus, and it is available on our YouTube channel and our websites. We hope you enjoyed the show with Abe Lincoln tonight. I hope that you will listen to us again, and thank you for listening. Please join us on Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the Parax Radio Network.
Good night. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks for listening to Channeling History. Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.